When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 88, the journey of unlearning, undoing, adapting, and unleashing her core identity. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Fatima Gould. Fatima is a remarkable community ambassador for change who inspires people with her public speaking, published works, and coaching services for both individuals and businesses. She has proven that nothing is impossible and is a shining example of hope as she transforms her own life. Through personal development, Fatima empowers a new generation of leaders and instills the belief that anyone can find hope, no matter their age or circumstance. Her book, titled Over the Wall, is an autobiography that takes the reader on a spiritual journey with Fatima. The book tells the story of Fatima's self-discovery and faith, which encourages the reader to believe in the power of God, the universe, and their higher self. Fatima's writing taps into its passion, humor, and cultural insights into generational patterns of behavior, leaving her book to be known as a powerful read. Hello, Fatima. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hello, I am so excited to be here with you this afternoon.
Oh, this is so fantastic. I'm also very excited. I am delighted to have you as a guest on the show today. Honestly, I have so much gratitude for your willingness to be here, to tell your story, to show up with vulnerability. It means a lot.
Awesome. And I'm excited to be here to share and to be inside of this amazing experience with you.
Yay, yay. You know, I've said this before. I'm truly humbled to encounter guests just like yourself who just allow me to tap into vulnerability, into those quiet spaces, the deep spaces, draw on strength and bring out insight and inspiration that gets shared into this space. It's very humbling for me. And so it's really important, it's crucial that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
I think that in this day and age, coming out of a pandemic, where people are and all the things that are going on in this world, it is very, very, very important to have discussions like this and topics where people can share and be vulnerable and know that it's time to change the narrative of the stigma. And so people can heal.
Exactly. And that's what the focus of this podcast is all about. It is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. And so this platform, it serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So today, together, I'm hoping, Fatima, that we team up and we have this hopeful mission together for encouraging people, your sharing and my inquiry, so that we can encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, I continue to bring forward a trend. It's called the mental beauty rethink. So, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
I thought that's a fascinating term, and I've
Uh-huh.
never heard it before. The
Hmm.
mental beauty rethink. I think, yeah, I think it all encompasses about that changing of the narrative from the
Hmm.
mental stigma and make that every individual and everything experience that they have, they're beautiful inside and out.
Hmm.
I think it's awesome.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really like your choice words. First of all, I'm actually really happy that you're so fascinated by the by the term overall. But just that encompassing the narrative, exactly the narrative of the stigma, being able to embrace all parts, right? And that's what it is meant to be an invitation to see it in a different way without judgment, without it having to be good or bad or right or wrong or separate from physical health,
Yep, I
right?
agree. I
Yeah.
agree because just a part of a person, right?
Hmm.
It can't be it like your hand is attached to something or just floating in the air over there. It's a part of you. So if you're beautiful inside and out, then anything that you go through, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, it's all part of the person, and it's all beautiful.
Right. Acceptance of self,
Yes.
the whole self, right?
Yes, reminds me of that song, "Everything is beautiful in its own way." I can't remember who sings that song, but
We have a singer here.
that's the song that pops into my head.
That's
"Everything is
great.
beautiful in its own way."
Right.
Tells you how old I am.
Sure. Sure. But acceptance of self, but also acceptance of others, the whole self and the whole
Yes.
person, right? So I'm really glad that we were able to chat about that and to get your take and your perspective. Okay, Fatima, we are
Yes.
about to get rolling with our interview. I hope you're feeling good and ready to proceed.
Ready to dive in.
Great, great, so great. All right. Then, Fatima, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
It would read "Chasing Butterflies."
One more time.
Chasing Butterflies.
Chasing butterflies. Hmm. All right. So, without giving away your story, are you able to share what chasing butterflies means for you?
It takes me back to a time of innocence when
Hmm.
innocence wasn't lost and you're a young person or a child and you like to do that. You like chasing butterflies or you like lying down in a field and picking lilies or even looking for four-leaf clovers.
Mm. So, like the free spirited child.
Yeah.
Mm.
Before life takes over, maybe
Uh,
even before you start going to school, maybe in kindergarten or senior kindergarten, right? Just at that time where you're being just allowed to be a child,
yeah, the permission to be.
to permission to be, and you're just fascinated by the things around you. I know my son used to like to watch cars go by, and his
Hmm.
head would just go from side to side to side to side whenever he saw a car. I don't know what the fascination of the car was, but I liken that chasing butterflies, that innocence, right,
Right.
to that.
Right. Right. Okay. That has so much meaning. I love it. Thank you for explaining that and unraveling some of the meaning there. It's so important to share. All right. So, Fatima, tell us what your untold story is all about. Give us that snapshot.
My untold story is about me being raised by my grandmother in the island of Barbados. When I
Hmm.
was 18 months, I was sent to live with my grandmother.
Hmm.
And that was a time in the 60s where people who migrated from the Caribbean to Canada, the US, or England would
Mm-hmm.
have their children, or they would leave children with their parents or aunties to be raised. So I
Mm-hmm.
was born in Canada but sent back to Barbados. And I came back here when I was 8 years old. And so at that time, I'd only seen my mother once during the time I was 18 months till I was 8 years old. So, what was it like for me
Mm-hmm.
to be reclimatized with Canada and
Mm-hmm.
to get to know my mother? That
Right.
is my untold story.
Mm. That is huge. That is so huge. Okay. And so what sorts of themes came up for you? Because I heard you say you needed to reclimatize yourself to Canada. I mean, you left Canada at 18 months and you're coming back as a young child, 8 years old. What was that like to climatize and getting to know a woman who's supposed to be the closest person to you, but you're not having that mother daughter connection? Can you share more about that?
So that was the part I believe was the hardest part, because she was mother, the
Hmm.
titled mother, but not the person who I thought my mother was in that emotional connection. That emotional connection was my grandmother, my ma. And
Right.
so to be able to feel those kinds of emotions that you would have towards your mother as I
Hmm.
became a mother is not the same. She was just the person who like gave birth, who
Hmm.
looked after me, fed me, clothed me, make sure I had a roof over my head, but that
Hmm.
emotional connection wasn't there. And so when
Okay.
my grandmother came to visit us here in Canada, she lived here for a while. And I would say, Mutta, my grandmother always answered. My mother never answered. And I'd have to say to my grandmother, I'm talking to my mother. And it was,
Mm.
I don't know what that was. It's like my mother didn't think I was even calling her. And that
Wow.
would give you just a whole nuances as on its own, right? This you're calling
Hmm.
somebody and they're hearing you, but the person who has that emotional connection to me, she's the one who's always answering. And the other person
Right.
is like a second thought.
There must have been so much confusion with those roles.
I don't know if it was much as a confusion for us because that's just the way that it was.
Okay.
And I wasn't the only one that was in the position who was raised by somebody in my family, especially. My
Okay.
grandmother raised three of us together, and she
I
wasn't our biological mother.
Okay. Okay. So tell me more about like themes that you encountered as you were trying to reclimatize yourself.
So the one thing that I remember really like so clearly was I came here for vacation, and then at the end of the vacation I was supposed to be going back to Barbados to go back to school, and then my mother said, "Well, you're not going." I'm like, "What do you mean I'm not going? You're staying here
Mm,
with me. I want you to stay here and live here
you
with
didn't
me."
even know. So when you
No.
came, it was just for the intention of vacation, like go see your mom, your family,
Yeah,
go have fun, be in a different environment. But there was in your mind, there was always the assumption and intention that you were going back.
that's right. That's in everybody's mind.
Okay, so that was the initial plan. Like everyone thought that.
Yes,
Okay.
that was the initial plan.
Did you ever get an explanation of what made her like change her mind, or was she just feeling guilty, or was she feeling so connected to you? Something must have changed if that wasn't the plan.
What she said over the years was, when you came, I realized that I missed you and that I wanted you here with me now. That was the only explanation that was
Okay.
given. And everybody else was like, she's your mother. So if your mother wants you back, then that's the way it's gonna go. But my grandmother had said to me, if she had known that that was the plan, she was never gonna send me.
So when this decision happened, it doesn't sound like your grandmother was happy with it.
No, it was too late because I was already in Canada. I was already in Toronto.
Right.
So there's nothing she can do about it.
Right. So that must have been heart-wrenching for your grandmother as well.
As for my grandmother as well, for all of us, for me, I
Yeah.
remembered crying myself to sleep for a whole
Hmm.
year.
A whole year?
A whole year. I cried
Mm.
myself to sleep for a whole year. It was really rough. And then talking about your mental health and mental stability, the people that you grew up with, people that know you, that love you, they're no longer there, and you're with a whole new set of people.
Mm-hmm. Tell me what it was like being stripped of everything that you were familiar with, because you didn't really realize that you were going to not go back to
Right.
Barbados.
And that was the heart-wrenching part. That was the part that was sad. That was the part of the child that was really longing and missing the people that look like me, sound like me, the people that were me, right? Because in
Mm-hmm.
Barbados, we're predominantly Black. And
Mm-hmm.
so coming here and then facing all different types of cultures and nationalities and being picked on by the kids, being bullied, being called names because of the color of my skin, my accent, and my hair, the cornrows in my hair.
Mm-hmm.
That was like so foreign. Like, what do you mean you're calling me chocolate? Okay, but that's weird. Chocolate's something you eat or drink. I didn't have any concepts of what they were saying to me because it didn't make sense to
Right.
call me chocolate. But in Barbados, yes, we have chocolate, and chocolate, you eat it. So why
Mm-hmm.
would you be calling me that? There's no, because everybody looks like you and sounds like you. There's no words for racism or
Right.
microaggression. Nobody's touching my hair and saying, oh my God, it feels like a Brillo pad, or why do you sound like that? Nobody's doing that to you as a
Mm-hmm.
child in Barbados, like I said, because everybody looks like you and sounds like you.
Right. And so, can you say more about how you had to adapt to all of that? What was that like?
I've likened it in the past to like just withdrawing. Every time there was an instance of bullying, every time there was somebody picking on me or physically
Mm-hmm.
abusing me, trying to beat me up, there was a withdrawing and a loss of that soul of that child who liked to chase butterflies. That
Mm-hmm.
person eventually was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just in survival mode, just
Mm-hmm.
surviving it all. And then when the winter comes, you're surviving that. So you're surviving the cold because where you're from is always warm.
Right.
You have to
Mm-hmm.
wear a hat, boots, gloves, snowstorms. Like, what is this? And you're not going outside. When the sun is shining, you're thinking it's warm outside, and you go outside and it's freezing cold. Like, that's a whole set of different things to wrap your head around, as well as getting to know my mother, as well as going to school and being put at the back of the class, people picking on you. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Did you get any support from your teachers at school?
The teachers, please don't even go there with the teachers. Some of the teachers were the biggest culprits of them all. The
Mm,
one teacher I had, he just kept putting me at the back of the classroom. Or if I asked something or just opened my mouth, he put me outside.
like timeout kind of corners?
Kind of, yeah, outside of the classroom to sit because, oh, you're too talkative, you're too this. But how am I talking? When I talk, the kids made fun of my accent, so there's no way I'm talking too much because the kids weren't
Right.
understanding me. So one of the kids said, duck down underneath your chair, pretend to tie your shoes, and we're going to talk to each other and see what happens. And as soon as they did that, as soon as he said, Fatima, get up and go outside. And we're like, what are you talking about? We were the ones talking. She was tying her shoelace. How are you blaming her? I don't care. Go outside. So that particular teacher was one of the most, I would say now, perpetrators of the racism that I felt as a kid.
Mm,
And so when you tell your mother's like, what are you talking about? Because in Barbados, teachers are people of authority, and teachers aren't racist. They're not doing microaggression. If you did something wrong, you did something wrong,
right.
and then you would get punished for it. And then when you go home, your parents would reprimand you because the teachers had that authority. But
Right.
here the teachers were racist, and it got played out and nothing happened. But because your parents are thinking there's still a people in authority, they're not thinking, oh, this teacher is going to be racist towards my child.
Right. How did your mother handle that?
Well, my mother just reprimanded me, and it was like if I was wrong because she didn't know any better. Because where she was from,
Right.
teachers are a position of authority. So you must be wrong. If he said
Right.
you did it, you must have done it.
And so what kind of reprimand would you face by your mom?
Well, that was like a lot of yelling. She like yelled a lot. Mommy just liked to
Mhm.
yell. So a lot, like there was no grounding. We didn't even know what that was. There's like
Okay.
no grounding. There's no timeout. There is like mostly yelling at you.
Okay. Okay. And how did you cope with all of that yelling? This was clearly not the same experience as what you were having in Barbados. like in Barbados, if you were doing something wrong, you knew you were doing something wrong.
That's right.
So how did you deal with all of that internal turmoil?
So again, that's the withdrawing, right? More withdrawing, more not talking to myself. And I think that's the time I developed the leg shaking. I don't remember shaking my leg as much as I did when I came here in Barbados.
Right. So that anxious leg shake.
That anxious leg shake. That's when I
Okay.
developed that as a kid when I came here.
Is there anything else that you remember developing or anything else you remember noticing about changes that were happening within you as you experienced all these like negative, undesirable moments?
It's like a lot of maybe stammering, not wanting to talk, just being very quiet and withdrawn, and just allowing for my life to be the way that it was when before I came here.
Hmm.
Mentally, I always said to myself, I'm never going to like the winter. I'm never going to like Canada. And I've always like one foot out the door to go back to Barbados to live.
Mm. Such a deep desire to be back in your own environment that you were so familiar with.
That's right.
Hmm.
100%.
And were there any other themes that came up for you, like as you dealt with this? Like I would imagine that you might have experienced grief and fear of abandonment and things like that, just because of how you experienced life and having things stripped from you. Would you say that those themes were part of your process?
100%. So the fear, the doubt, low self esteem, no self confidence, not very confident in myself at all, not feeling like I was worthy, and definitely a feeling of not belonging. I did not belong here.
Hmm. And how did you deal with the no feeling of belonging?
I spent a lot of time praying, praying and crying and asking God to just send me back to my grandmother. That was the
Mm.
year of a lot of crying and just sending me back because I didn't know how to even call her. Because
Mhm.
when you think about it, in 1975, you'd
Mhm.
have to pick up the phone and make a long distance call. So I didn't know how to make a long distance call. I just knew how to call locally in Barbados. And
Right.
I didn't even know the phone number to call,
Right.
right? So you wouldn't know that. So you start to write letters. So, and you give the letters to mommy. I don't even know if she mailed them. I should ask her.
Yeah.
It was like, when do I get to speak to Ma? It was every once in a blue moon when my mother would call home and then I would get to speak to my grandmother. But I don't even remember that having happening too often.
Well, yeah, long distance calls were a treat. Growing up, even in my family, like my mom's family is all in the West Coast in Canada, but it wasn't like nationwide calling, right? Like it was a long distance call. Like you're calling the West Coast. And so be like a month or a couple of months. Like I remember one time the phone ringing and my mom was talking and she goes, "Come here. You got to talk to your family, and they were all impressed talking to me, passing the phone from one person to another because it was such a big deal. And I remember like, oh, I talked to them. Who knows how many months it'll be or how much time will pass before I see them or speak to them again.
Yes.
And so that sounds like what you were experiencing as a child. It's like I have no sense of what this phone, like how these phones connect and how I could talk to the person that's most familiar to you, that you have the most intimate connection with. It's very encouraging to see that you were so resourceful that you're like, well, I can't talk to her on the phone, so I'm going to write letters to my grandma. That's what I'm going to do. The fact that you at least had that sense, that connection, that intuitive side within you to say, I'm going to do this. But yeah, long distance calls, they were a treat.
100%. And when the
Yeah.
phone, I was saying, having that conversation with my husband because he had no clue what that's all about being born here.
Hmm.
And I said, the phone would ring differently when it was a long
Yes,
distance call,
you're
right?
right. You're
Remember
right.
that? It was,
Yeah.
and everybody would be like, oh my God, long distance call, long distance. And you'd be dashing to the phone
Yeah.
before it got cut off.
Yeah. Yeah. It would ring differently, and you knew it was a long distance call. You're 100% correct.
Yeah.
I remember that. And so that must have been like an eye opener for your husband as well when you were having that conversation with him.
It was. He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Yes, the phone would ring differently when you were calling long distance. And if you're calling long distance in the middle of the night, you know something is wrong.
Yeah, like you just have to pick it up. Like there's
You
no
have
like, hello, what's going on, you know?
yes.
And we didn't have caller ID or those things.
Nope.
So you were picking up the phone blindly.
100%.
Right. My goodness. Throwback moments, huh?
Right? Throwback moments.
Yes. But yeah, so tell me, so I'm so intrigued. Can you tap into like some of the grief? I imagine, I mean, I can't assume, but my thoughts just go to like grieving the loss, even as an 18-month-old child. You had this relationship with your mom, the mother who gave you birth, and now you're in a completely different environment. You got familiarized and nurtured and nourished in this environment in the Caribbean. You had a full life there with full support, lots of love, lots of encouragement, and built and bonded. You built your inner core as well. There's so many things you were achieving. And then to come back to Canada for vacation, or what you thought was vacation, what everyone thought was vacation, and then the tune changed. I'm assuming that there was loss there for this relationship with the grandma that you've been describing just now, as well as how do I connect with this other woman? Like, this is supposed to be my mother. So, how does that work? Can you say a little bit more about if there was like a grief loss experience to your knowledge?
You're the first person that has ever said that it was grief. I never even thought about it as grief. I never even looked at it to go through the process of grieving and accepting and anger and all that. I never looked at it like that until you just said that it was grief. And somebody else, when I read the book, this girl that I knew from grade 7 or 8, she became a psychologist, I want to say. And she bought the book and she read it and she immediately called me and she goes, I want to have a conversation with you about the book. And
Okay.
she said, "Do you realize that you would have gone through what you're just coined as the grief and loss process twice?" I said,
Hmm.
"What are you talking about?" And you just alluded to that. She
Yeah.
goes, I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Well, when you left at 18 months, you would have known your mom. Think about it.
Mhm.
An 18-month-old knows their surroundings. They know you would have known who your mother
Yeah,
was."
you built some comforts, right? You built comforts. You obviously most of the time way of communication is crying, right? Your different cries to express your needs, but you
Yes,
have a sense of your surroundings. You know what's familiar. You know when a new person is in the home, when there's a visitor or the people who make you feel safe and you smile and laugh, and the things that make you feel uncomfortable.
yes. And so she said when she left you in Barbados, there was a sense of loss. And I said, "Okay, so what would I have done at 18 months?" She said, "You would have just cried. You would have just kept crying and crying till you stopped crying because she wasn't coming back for you. So you would just cry until you got familiar with the
Mm.
people around you,
Mhm.
which then makes sense that I would cry for a year when I came back because that sense of loss was a familiar one to that child at 8, the
Mhm.
same kind of loss at 18 months.
Right.
So then what are we looking at and what's the sense of grief now? When
Mhm.
I came back, I realized, wait a minute, I had a whole life here. Like my father was here, I had aunts, uncles, babysitters, people who knew me. So when I came back, they were all excited to see me and how I had grown. And I didn't even know them. Like I don't even know who you are, but they knew me.
Right, right. And they might have been so excited to see you,
Yes.
and, you're like, "I don't even know who you are."
I don't even know who you are.
That's really interesting because one of my cousins who I'm extremely close with from the West Coast, because he also spent a lot of time here and living in my family's home, I remember when I had a chance to visit and his daughter was 3 years old, I was warned by the grandparents, like, "She has a temperament," or, "She kinda gets moody, she's kinda finicky, you might not know what to expect." So I was like, "Okay." But it was so strange that the moment I met her and that her father gave me a hug, she literally jumped into my arms, and for the rest of my time there, we were like best buds, right? It was so lovely. And then I hadn't seen her for so long. And I saw her this past summer as a 13-year-old. And here I am so excited to see her. She knows that her grandma is so close to me. And in my mind, I was so excited that this little person is grown up and she's an extension of one of my favorite cousins who I have such a great bond with and a family I'm so close to, only to be like, she's kind of like tolerating me. Like, who are you?
Right.
Not understanding the bond that I have with her family, how I was so involved in her parents' wedding or engagement party, like all those things. And I can relate to that when you talk about your entire family waiting for you for your arrival. And you're like, I do not know you.
Yep. And mommy's friends and my godparents, like all these people knew who
Right.
was. And I didn't even know when my birthday was. I didn't even know I had a middle name. I just know my first and my last name. There's so many things about myself.
Wow. So these identity pieces were just coming out of the woodwork.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
Yes. And it's fascinating because even my cousin that grew up with me, she didn't realize she didn't have a middle name until
Hmm.
she came back and she saw her birth certificate. And
Hmm.
your birthday is like they're not celebrating birthdays in Barbados like that. Not when I was a kid. It just came and went. The big celebrations was Christmas and Easter, and that was it. You're not celebrating any of these other things like we do here.
Oh,
And so
wow.
to learn when my birthday was, that it was, August the 4th, I'm like, okay, that's cool. To know that I had all these middle names, I have got three names and then my last name. And
Mhm.
then my mother told me where the names came from. It was an interesting to now put together the pieces of the puzzle that I didn't even know was missing.
Right. Wow, so many puzzle pieces. Well, like, how daunting was that?
It was exciting because
Okay.
it was new information about myself. And if I hadn't come, I don't know if I would ever known that.
Okay, fair enough.
Right? So you're finding out all these new things. You're finding out about the cousins. You're finding out about godparents, friends that she had, her life here. And
Mhm.
because these things were happening when I just got here and I thinking I'm going back home, it was all exciting and news just to accumulate to share with my cousins when
Ah,
I go back. Oh, this is my name. This is my birthday. Do you know when your birthday is? Do you know any of these things about yourself? So you're accumulating all this stuff to remember to share when I go back, not knowing that I'm not sharing them with anybody because I'm not going back. So it was
yeah.
exciting to find them all out.
Yeah, so you were able to stay present with that because at that time, you were coming here for vacation.
That's right.
Okay. How did the fear of abandonment show up? Did it show up for you? Did that theme come up for you at all?
All these things came up as an adult. So the abandonment, I did a personal growth and development
Mhm.
course. And then the girl who sat in front of me to read my synopsis of a share that I had. She goes, "Oh, you were abandoned." And I got so emotional. It's like, just like you put grief in the space, she put abandonment in the space. But for me and the other kids who were like me, we're not thinking that. That's just the way life is. Your parents moved away to another country for
Mhm.
a better life, for advancements, for whatever it is that they moved to go to school, to get a job, to do better than where they were in the Caribbean. And you end up living with your extended family. That's just the what so of life. We're not sitting around thinking that it's a loss and it's a grief, but
Right.
only as an adult and somebody shares it with you. And then you
Right.
realize that was what my life was.
So of course, like as you were going through it, you wouldn't have known that these internal signals and different emotions and things you were experiencing and moments of overwhelm, you might not have known that it's related to abandonment or fear of it. Of course, in hindsight, in your later years, in your adult years, connecting back, what would you have said? Like, oh, that moment would have been like how the abandonment theme was coming up, or maybe something like over here.
So it would be the abandonment piece would be, okay, so you left me in Barbados at 18 months, so you abandoned me and came back to your life. So but why did you take 8 years to do all that? That's a long time. You didn't take a year or two to go back to school. Going back to school would take a year or two, but it was a whole 8 years. So
And then she decided spontaneously.
yeah.
Right.
So that's when the whole like, oh my God, that's abandonment. That's
Right.
what that is. That's an 8-year abandonment. And I couldn't wrap my head around it because by then I had my own kids and I'm not leaving them with anybody.
Right. And then, so you had this OMG moment, like 8-year abandonment. And then, did you ever feel like abandoned by your grandma? Like she couldn't do anything? Like,
No. The funny thing is, my grandmother was on a pedestal by all of us, me and my other two cousins that I was raised with.
mhm.
Matt is on this pedestal. She cannot do anything wrong. She took an 18 months old child and she raised it. And she did not beat us. She didn't tell us you don't belong here. She didn't say, I don't know why your mother doesn't come and get you. I don't know why I'm saddled with you. Like,
Did it so wholeheartedly and lovingly.
wholeheartedly and so lovingly. And whatever one got, the other two got. So it's not like, oh, your mother and father are sending you this and you don't get to share it with any of these people. No,
There was no back talking of the parents or any.
no back talking of the parents.
I have these 3 children to take care of, and I'm going to give them all my love.
All of it. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it.
Did you not feel it at all? Like once you were in Canada, knowing you're not going back, like did it not ever strike you to think like, how come my grandma can't come to get me? Like, how come she's not able to do anything? Or were you just aware that she was stuck?
You're consciously aware how's she getting on a plane. Like, I don't even know how I managed to get on a plane. Like, I
Right.
didn't realize you had to buy a ticket, come on the plane, pack,
Yeah.
packing. Remember back in the day, going to the airport, everybody went with you to the airport to see the plane off.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the
Yeah.
family, right? And you're dressed to the nines and you've got this new suitcase and all your clothes are in these. I don't even know where the clothes came from, half of them. So where would Mag get a suitcase? Where would Mag put these? Where's she getting these clothes? Like all of these things you consciously know.
But even in knowing that she's not able to, you didn't feel like left out?
Not by my grandmother, no.
No, not at
No,
all, eh?
that was all my mother's wrongdoing because she was the one who brought me up here,
Okay.
sent my aunt back home, and then let me go back to my grandmother. So
Okay.
it was never abandoned by my grandmother. It was like, why did you bring me here and not send me back? Like it was all on my mom.
So the abandonment piece was strictly from what you experienced with your mom, but certainly you experienced the grief and loss of the relationship that you had with your grandmother.
With my grandmother.
Separated from her, parted from her unexpectedly
Yes.
after the 8 years of growth, 8 years of tender love and care. When you came to Canada at age 8, did your other 2 cousins that you were raised with also come at the same time as you?
No, my cousin, the one cousin, the oldest of the three, he still lives there. Like he's been there all of his life and he's 60. He came to my grandmother when he was 2 and he's
Okay.
never left.
Wow.
He's still living there. And my other cousin came when she was 16.
Okay. Okay. You were also stripped of those relationships as well.
Yep. I was born a firstborn child, but raised a middle child.
Uh-huh.
And that alone is a whole another, that's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different
Well,
podcast.
you're always welcome to come back.
Birth order is a whole different podcast, right? So,
Yeah, birth order is definitely something we can always dive into on another episode.
yeah.
Wow, this has been so intriguing to see and hear about this process and what it has been like for you. I'm curious, when people come to see me in the therapy space, Fatima, individuals are typically in one of 3 places. Some people, they're just getting started. They know that they want to incorporate therapy in their life and just work on stuff and unpack things and, make sense of things, have a healthy mindset and have healthy ways to cope and just kind of put that as part of their rhythm for their health and well-being. And then there's people who are in the middle of something. So like there's an acute stressor or like a compounding factor, and they need help navigating murky waters and dealing with all of those things and unpacking layers that are affecting whatever it is that they're specifically triggered by and need to see me for. And some people are looking back where they're either trying to gain some closure or they're learning about tools and strategies about personal growth. They're learning about all of the things that they were unaware of that can then bring them insights into what tools and strategies that they need in order to move forward in life. Where, for yourself, in the journey that you've talked about in terms of your untold story, where on your path would you say that you are? Would you say that you're getting started in the middle or looking back?
Looking back.
Looking back.
Definitely looking back.
You're affirmed, like looking back. So,
Yeah.
what do you want to remember about the process of your healing journey if you know that you're looking back?
I want to remember that my mom didn't do anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother didn't do anything to me. Nobody's done anything to me. And looking back, I now realize that. And again, in that personal growth and development course that I
Mm-hmm.
took, that's where I got a sense of that self, of that she didn't set out to intentionally. That's just the way
Mm-hmm.
life was back in that time as a Black woman coming from the Caribbean, moving to Canada. You don't have the same resources. So she was the first of her siblings to come. So there's no mother, father, sister, brother to help her with a child. So she
Mm-hmm.
sent her back to where she knew the child was going to be safe and
Mm-hmm.
where it had that extended family.
Right.
And why it was normalized is because back in the day, my grandmother got married and had kids. She had 9 of them. Some of them went to live with her mother and father, but that was a 20-minute walk, not a 4-hour plane ride, right?
Right.
So they're not even processing that part. So there was nothing that was done to me. That was just the circumstance of the life of which I was born into at that time.
So remembering that there was no ill intentions and that it literally was a way to make it in life, coming from where your roots came from. And for your mom, she was being creative with her resources in a familiar way of this is how we roll, like this is how we operate, this is what is accepted, this is how we manage.
Right.
This is part of the development of life, or this is part of the life cycle.
This is how it goes.
This is the norm.
That's right.
This is the regular thing to do. Like so it wasn't seen as anything outrageous or out of this world.
Right.
This is what people did.
And then inside of the process where you're talking about grief is now, I'm at the forgiveness part, forgiving all of those people who maybe just didn't know better. Because one of my things is, do unto others as you have them do unto you.
Hmm.
Maybe we don't know what their life was like,
Hmm.
hurt people. And in being the space of forgiveness, and now that I know better, I can do better.
Yes. Yes. Know better and do better. Okay. So, I mean, we have talked about so many different aspects of your journey and the untold story and the themes that you encountered and, everything along the way. I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit more directly to how your untold story has affected your mental health or how it affected your mental health at the time. Like I know earlier in our conversation, you mentioned fear and low self esteem and self doubt and poor self confidence and not feeling worthy, navigating your sense of belonging. Can you speak more about the detriments to your mental health?
It's a lot. Now, every
Hmm.
time, when you put it the way that you're putting it, oh my goodness, it's a lot.
And it's so much for a little 8-year-old. You were
Yes.
so little
It's a lot for anybody.
for anyone, but you were so little. Can you just acknowledge that? You were so
I
little,
was little. I
so
was little.
little. Hmm.
And I think where it played on my mental health is just to bury every emotion.
Mm. So it's like your knee jerk reaction, your auto response became to just bury things down.
Bury things down, swallow it.
Mm.
Just don't, like, there was a thing back in the day, if you cried, they would give you spankings and say, "Do you want something to cry for?" Like that kind of thing is training a child not to deal with any of its emotions, just suppress, suppress,
Mhm,
suppress, suppress,
mhm,
suppress, suppress. And then to a point where you just bubble over, and
mhm,
then you get angry, and then it releases somehow. So it's either released in anger or in yelling, or it release in crying. It used to be for me a lot of crying, just a lot of it. When it's
mhm.
too much, I cry. I break down and I just cry. And I think
Right.
that's where the mental piece came in, is just suppressing every emotion that
Mm.
you have, whether good or bad. If you express a good one, then that good thing will be taken away, right? If you get too
Okay.
happy, then it will be taken away.
Joy, peace, serenity, fear, confusion, anger, irritability, anything. You're talking about anything.
anything. You bury it. You bury it because nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody cares about you. Suck it up and you just keep going. They
Hmm.
used to say to me where it came to the stuff about my mom, and I was just so angry at her and like, what is her problem? What is her issue? Why can't we get along? That's your mother. Just suck it up and get over it.
Suck it
That's
up.
what you're doing. Suck it up and get over it. So that's how you live your life. You suck it up and you get over it, and you just hold your head down and you just plow through life because you're
Right.
now in a state of just like that hamster. You're just going
Right.
and
The
going and
hamster
going
wheel.
and going. That's it.
So when did you undo this narrative?
It's taken a long time. It started in 2008 by doing the Landmark Forum
Hmm.
and recognizing that there's absolutely nothing wrong with me and there's nothing wrong with having an emotion and there's
Right.
nothing wrong with expressing yourself. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with wearing color. There's nothing wrong with wearing red. There's nothing wrong with just laughing because you're not laughing. You're even not smiling because you're told that your teeth are too big or you're skinning your teeth like a roast
Right.
dog, like all the negative things that they're
Right.
telling you just to keep you down. In that moment when I did that 3-day course, it was like you can now start to unpack that and be fully expressive
Mm.
and just be happy. So it started in 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Fatima, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you really want them to know?
I want people to know that no matter where you are in life or however old you are or whatever your circumstances, there is hope.
Hmm.
Once you have hope, there isn't any wall that you cannot climb or you cannot get over.
Hmm.
That's what I want them to know.
Anything else that you think is important for them to know?
And I want them also know is to just love themselves.
Hmm.
You are perfectly and wonderfully made. And
Hmm.
whatever it is that you're going through life, there's a reason for you to go through it. Because then when I did my Reiki and my energy healing, I got to know when I took on my spirituality, is that your soul decided that it wanted to come here. It wanted to be here for a reason, a season, and a purpose. So know that whatever it is you're going through is for a season, a reason, and a purpose. And on the other side, there is hope.
Hmm. Wow. It's really moving. I'm just taking it in. That's a beautiful message. Okay, so what I'm curious about, what would you say is your game changer inspiration that's close to you? Something that really reflects your untold story, like an inspirational quote or book or person or a place that really sparked inspiration that kind of gave you some momentum to keep going?
That was when I joined a multi level marketing company and they introduced me to personal growth and development.
Hmm.
That moment right there when I said, wow, this stuff isn't just, hairy fairy or kind of just thing that people say. And I watched The Secret over and over and over, and I learned about manifestation, and you can manifest whatever it is that you want.
Hmm.
That was the game changer. And my kids keep talking about that.
Hmm.
Fortunately, mommy gave us all these tools at such a young age because whatever she saw and read, we saw and read.
Right.
My son was recounting how he would watch The Secret over and over and over and over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
that's how he copes with life, is just by remembering those things,
Right.
manifesting what it is that you want, putting good vibes out there. And they're always about the good vibes. So
Sure. Awesome. Okay, and who do you want to give a shout out to? Who has been impactful on your journey? So, what is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you want to give a shout out to? Who are they?
I want to give a shout out to Calabash, which is an organization of Black consultants, because we want to go out there and show that representation matters and
Hmm.
that we represent. So, where I wasn't represented as a kid, and even
Yeah,
in the teens, the representation is there, but we're representing now.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Awesome. Okay. And how can people connect with you if they would like to? How are you findable?
I have a website, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and I have a YouTube channel.
Amazing. We've gathered that information from you, so it should be clickable on your show notes page. So that's perfect. All right. Fatima, guess what?
What?
You have just dared yourself to share. Congratulations. You did it. Uh-huh.
I want to jump up and down, but it'll make noise.
You know what? On a serious note, as you visualize yourself jumping up and down, Fatima, I would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the deep story shared in this space today. Your willingness to take such a deep dive into complex themes of fear of abandonment, grief and loss of identity, learning and adapting to new circumstances at such an innocent young age, navigating relationships and connecting with your own core identity. This is an important story to share and to be heard, as it will encourage others to recognize their own journey. So I am truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing.
And thank you very much for giving me into the space of grief and loss. I didn't have that before, but now I have a context and a word for it. Thank you.
Tapping into something new.
Yes.
Right? The neurolinguistics of delayering. So once again, Fatima, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.